Hey, man, you try to put on some muscle. You do? Well, hell, you just found one of the best fitness channels on YouTube. Give me some room. There you go, man. Give me some more room. Damn, man. Remember those days? Back before they grew beards? Asada, Resistance Quest, here with you, Mark, 12-year fitness nutrition professional. We're going to talk about science-based training. But before I get started, you're probably wondering, what does this Peter Pencilneck know about fitness? And what right does he have to talk about anything? Well, let me show you some of my bona fides. Ready? I'm just going to remove this mic for a second. Oh. You're just, just a little something. Just a little good luck charm here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little something there, okay? I paid some of my dues. Some of them. All right, so what is all this Peter Pencilneck talk about postmodernism that I'm about to get into? If you're critical of science-based training, whatever that is, I think you'll like this video. If you support it, I think you might get some ideas from it. The basic concept comes down to where value comes from, right? Now, in the olden days, value was determined by the object itself. Whatever the object is, that's the thing being valued, right? It was determined by the object. You needed a hammer. A hammer possesses the qualities of a hammer. Hammer has value, right? In this day and age, a little more, right? It's the subject that determines the value. The subject versus the object, right? So I am the subject, the person is the subject, whatever I'm looking at or evaluating is the object. Part of why subject-determined value is prevalent now is because of the existence of money. Money is a thing that we all agree has value. The paper itself is a bookmark. That's its value unto itself. But because of subjectively determined, shall we say, collectively agreed upon value that the money has, that's the value the money has, not the object value, not the objective value, value that derives from the object itself, okay? So, how does all this relate to science-based training? I'll give you a parallel before I really get into that, right? You're gonna like this, okay? You're gonna like this a lot. The body positivity movement, right? So science indicates that obesity is unhealthy, A. B, which is in opposition to A, B, the body positivity movement, at least at one time, talked about healthy at any weight. Now, I'm not here to argue about the athletic prowess of someone who happens to be overweight. I've seen overweight people who are extremely athletic, like doing Muay Thai for 2 hours straight, or Kung Fu for 2 hours straight, or doing a few pull-ups and then doing freaking burpees, all this kind of like CrossFit shit for like fucking 45 straight minutes. I've seen that shit. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea of whether you can be healthy or even whether the state of obesity is itself healthy. Are you healthier with obesity? Right? And that is the implication of some of these arguments, these body positivity arguments. Now, what does this lead to? It leads to the idea that if there is a value being evaluated, and the value is your health, what is determining your health? If it was an objectively determined value, then it would be the scientific sort of like evidence, or it would be the scientific consensus, or it would be as close to objective as humanly possible, right? Because there is no God telling us being obese is healthy or being obese is unhealthy. No, we have to determine objectivity on some level of our own, right? So forget that for a second. Essentially, the value, the health level of a person is determined by how they feel versus how they are, i.e., blood markers, scale weight, obesity level, body fat level, BFI, whatever, right? So coming back to that, it's no longer the object, which is their own body, that determines how healthy they are, health being the marker of value. No, it's not that per se. It's how they feel that determines how healthy they are, right? Now, I'm not here to throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? Let's get that straight, okay? How you feel subjectively is extremely valuable and important. And it is not up to me or any individual person to deny someone else's lived experience, right? Someone else's religious experience, someone else's emotional experience that happens to be so strong that you can't understand it. Doesn't mean you can deny their experience. Doesn't mean that. If someone feels healthy in a bigger body and that healthiness level motivates them to work harder to lose weight, then you're not going to deny that either, are you? No, right? So a lot of the people who would be like, yeah, well, your feelings don't matter, okay? I'm responsible for what I say, not for how you feel. The people who say that are often completely so unaware of themselves. They lack such self-awareness, right, that they would predicate an argument on their own feelings whenever it benefits them, but deny it from someone else when it's convenient, right? Side note, okay, back to the point. So science-based training, right, is sort of like the body positivity movement in this way, this following way. There are objective measurements of progress in the gym when you're doing your 5s or your 10s, right? There are objective measurements, such as the weight on the bar goes up, the number of reps you do goes up, your muscle size goes up, body fat goes down, strength goes up, endurance goes up, whatever. On some level, these are objectively measurable, just like scale weight is objectively measurable. Your scale weight is not emotionally informed. It's objectively informed, as much as you can. So what science-based training does is it tries to use what it views as objective measurements, which is the scientific evidence. It tries to use arguments derived from that evidence to produce value, right, that may or may not create or lead to objectively measurable results. Here's what I mean. They'll take the inferences from scientific studies to create a system of training, science-based training, that is, according to the evidence, superior to any other system. Meanwhile, people have been making incredible strength gains in the gym, not following science-based training for decades, and they still are. Similarly, one of the critiques that people like Eric Bugenhagen make of science-based lifters is that they don't see the results. They don't see the results that they claim they should be getting. Renaissance periodization may not see it. Jeff Nippard may not see it. Like how much bigger or healthier are these people, right? Compared to people who just hoist, heft, heave, and horse tremendous loads, right? You'll get bigger and stronger. And the strength you build and the size you build are the objective measurements of progress, right? Whereas the science-based training, which claims to be superior because it's based on science, may or may not produce these objectively measurable, good, if not superior, results. Okay? So this is where science-based training sort of starts to look like functional training back in the 2010s or even before that, where the idea was if you can't isolate your VMO muscle by sitting on a Swiss ball, holding a dumbbell overhead and raising your hip in the air while your butt sits on a Swiss ball, raising your leg in the air and straightening your leg to activate the VMO, right? If you can't do that, you're not going to be able to gain strength properly. And you really shouldn't be lifting because it's dangerous. So there's a lot of gatekeeping going on there, right? Meanwhile, lifters who did not have optimally stimulated VMOs were making fantastic quality gains. So that is another example where some kind of evidence-based outlook is producing a worldview or a system that claims to be superior, but does not produce measurable objective results, at least not prevalently, at least not most of the time, right? Compared to things that are not scientifically informed, right? Like bro science, the idea of bro science. And I'm going to do another video on that. So what does this mean? Why do I make this video? We are living in the postmodern era. What does this mean? It means that value is more and more often determinable by the subject, not the object. It means more and more that the audience determines the value of a work or its meaning more than the author or authority, the authority. The author is no longer the authority. And if you want to look at culture through this lens, you can see why a lot of film, popular film, is not so good now, because it's being used to basically having its terms and qualities dictated by the audience or what the filmmakers think the audience wants, right? So it's no longer an artistic mind driving the product, driving the creative process. It's the audience's secondhand, third-hand input informing that process, leading to work that is, shall we say, lacking a creative spark. Okay. But getting away from film for a minute, back to where I was coming from. Science-based training allows a person to perform exercises that are easier to execute, that feel better to execute, like seated unilateral cable pull downs, right? Or things that involve the stretch, pushovers or whatever the hell they're called, right? That are seated in one hand, and you really focus on the stretch, really focus on the contraction. There's nothing wrong with those things. By the way, right, non-science-based lifters were using those techniques decades ago, literally, right? There's nothing new, right? It's just now it's couched in the science-based mystique and framework that seems to validate it as a superior method. And if you're not doing it, you're wasting time, or you're not being as optimal, or you're not being as efficient, right? And so you can end up with a generation of lifters, and this is what I think people like Alex Leonidas are talking about or referring to. You can end up with a generation of lifters who aren't getting stronger, aren't getting bigger, aren't bulking, aren't doing power lifts, right? The power lifts, the big three or the big five, right? And consequently, are arguing for a methodology that they view as superior, that they view as optimal, that is not, by and large, observably producing superior results. So the question is, what do we do with that, right? This video is long enough. I hope that if you found this fascinating and you want a little more in-depth discussion of it, feel free to go to my blog and read the entire piece I wrote on this subject, or you can listen to it as an audiobook on my Mixcloud page very soon. I hope it's on the Mixcloud page. And I want to know what you think. This is a abstract discussion of a subject that seems above these things or separate from these things, but The funny thing is, by being able to analyze phenomena through the lens of subject and object, which is nothing new, not like I invented it, right? But by doing so, you can really start to see where bullshit is prevailing, right? Because what ends up happening in this case is that a lot of these young kids who want to get jacked as quickly as possible are adhering to a science-based outlook of easier exercises, optimality, efficiency that may or may not produce the outcome they want. But what the really whack sauce, shitty side effect of it is the Dunning-Kruger effect. That now that they've studied or become invested in optimal science, now they have to become an expert on that worldview, and then they have to defend that worldview to the nth degree. So they will be immune to evidence that counters that worldview, at least for a while, right? And as Eric Bugenhagen says, if you like to do those lifts and that gives you joy, who gives a shit? Do that, right? But if the results are what you're after, we would be doing humanity a disservice by not pointing out that these methods may or may not create real world results, and the science that they're based on, just because they're based on science, doesn't mean that the application of those results is objective. It can be informed by your biases. The conclusions drawn from these studies, when applied in the real world, have no control group, right? With a control group, you can determine superiority, as they supposedly do in these studies. In the real world, there is no control group. You're doing it, you're feeling it, you're in the moment, you're emotionally invested in it, and you want to see the results, so you're going to see them, even if there aren't any results. But what good does that do you? All right? So, like I said, if the subject interests you, I'll put the link to the blog and the audiobook version in the description of this video, and I hope to see you soon.